Hello and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS. Before we begin today's session of the Hindu analysis, just a reminder, 6th of June will be the beginning of the UPSC knowledge series on our YouTube channel of BYJU'S IAS. In this series, for straight 50 days, we will be bringing to you live classes on the most important static topics of all the subjects of the UPSC Civil Services Examination. There will be 2 live classes every single day at 10 a.m. and at 3 p.m. on our YouTube channel. So don't miss them. And if you have still not subscribed to our YouTube channel, please do hit the subscribe button and press the bell icon. This series is specially designed for those who are planning to appear for the 2023 examination or give attempts beyond that. Now let's come back to today's Hindu newspaper with the first important article that focuses on the present India-Pakistan relationship. The author here is saying that the India-Pakistan relation in the past year or so has been pretty quiet, which is a very good sign for the two sides, especially from the point of view of India. Since we have had clashes with China at the Galwan Valley, we have realized the fact that we cannot afford a two-front war. We cannot afford hostilities on both the sides of our borders. And that is why India has been holding back channel talks with Pakistan with UAE as the mediator. It was because of these back channel talks that in February 2021, the two sides agreed to have a ceasefire agreement. This is after when some years before 2021 saw the most number of ceasefire violations between the two sides. So this is a great sign. Not just this, there have also been talks between the two sides on different platforms. For example, the Pakistani delegation was in New Delhi on Monday to hold talks on the Indus Water Treaty. Also, if you remember, in the month of March, it was the Indian side that had gone to Islamabad to attend the previous meeting again on the same topic of the Indus Water Treaty. This also shows the fact that the two sides may not be talking every single day or on the Kashmir issue, but the two sides are still in talks on a lot of other issues, which is always a positive sign. Not just this, India has also been sending wheat to Afghanistan continuously since the month of February through Pakistan. So Pakistan allowed that to happen as well, which shows that the two sides are eager to come to the table and have discussions, but cannot openly do that because of various reasons. And let me give you some reasons. For example, till the time that Imran Khan was the Prime Minister of Pakistan, we did not really have a lot of breakthrough in the bilateral relations. Imran Khan had played the rhetoric against India and he was showing a very anti-India stand. Now that Imran Khan is in the opposition, he is no longer the Prime Minister of Pakistan, he is holding rallies throughout Pakistan and is getting a lot of support. Now, at this point of time, if the Pakistan government announces that we are trying to have official talks with India, it will work in the favor of Imran Khan. Because there is always an anti-India rhetoric in Pakistan, just like we have an anti-Pakistan rhetoric in India. That is why, despite wanting to go ahead, the Pakistan government cannot officially announce that we are going to have significant talks with India. Thus, for now, we have to make do with the back channel talks only and talks on smaller issues like the Indus Water Treaty and sending wheat to Afghanistan, etc. The good part that has happened with India is that now that the coalition government is in power in Pakistan, India has usually had good relationship with these parties that are in power in Pakistan right now. These include the party of Nawaz Sharif, whose brother is now the Prime Minister of Pakistan. This is a good chance for India and Pakistan to come together and at least have talks on smaller issues such as the Sar Creek dispute, such as the resumption of the bilateral trade, such as the return of high commissioners to each other high commissions in India and Pakistan. Because this will at least be a small signal towards an incremental step in the long run. The author is saying that from the Indian government side also, a lot has changed in the past 2 or 3 years. If you look at what happened in 2019, there were considerable confrontations between the two sides in 2019. There was a Pulwama attack followed up by the Balakot strike, so much so that in 2019 elections, the ruling party in India kept on saying that we are the ones who can actually give a response to Pakistan in their own language. However, if you actually notice the Indian politics right now, rhetoric against Pakistan has declined considerably. The politicians in power do not really speak in those terms as they were speaking a couple of years back, which is an indication that the Indian side also realizes that since the situation with China has become really bad in the past few years, we cannot afford to have a two-front situation. and it is in our best interest to keep the things quite on the LOC if they are not quite on the LAC side. Thus, it is good that the two sides are not going back to the 2019 era because it was not good for either of the two sides. At the end of the day, both the sides are nuclear power nations and both the sides are proud nations which will do anything to preserve their pride. And that is why it does not really make much sense for the two sides to face on these issues. Now, I'm sure all of you would be quite aware of the Sir Creek dispute which is mentioned in this article. But just to refresh your memory, Sir Creek is actually a very small, narrow, marshy body between India's Gujarat and the Sindh province of Pakistan. The division of this Sir Creek has been an issue between India and Pakistan ever since our independence. This is because there are different interpretations of this Sir Creek line and India's border. As per India, the red line that you see here represents India's border, while for Pakistan, India's border ends at this green line. Now, it is expected that there are a lot of fisheries and hydrocarbon resources in the Sir Creek area, and that is why you see quite frequently fishermen of each other's countries being arrested by the forces of India and Pakistan. The similar situation that we have with Sri Lanka. Indian fishermen are arrested by Pakistan because they say that they have crossed into their territory, and the same happens with India. Now, although there is a boundary dispute here, but it is not as significant as the one that we have in Kashmir, many experts say that the focus should be on resolving these kind of issues first. Once we build confidence between the two sides about each other's intentions, it would be much easier for us to resolve bigger issues between the two sides. As the article says, the two sides have been engaged in back channel talks for a long time now, initiated by our National Security Advisor, Mr. Ajit Doval. Now, you might also see some articles in the newspaper with the Indian government saying that there are no back channel talks going on with Pakistan. Now, there are two reasons for that. Number one, if the government does agree that yes, there are back channel talks going on, then what is the use of them being called back channel? The back channel talks means they are unofficial talks which are off the record. So obviously the government would not accept it. Secondly, as I discussed, the reason why Indian government or the Pakistani government does not want to accept it is because the common perception in both the nations is that we do not need to have talks with each other and we are better off without having any relations. But the leaders at the top realize that this is not true. Both the sides need each other. Let me give you one more example. In Pakistan, there's a considerable shortage of food grain. So Pakistan is right now going around the world talking to different countries for import of wheat. Now their best option can be India. India is just right the corner. If they import wheat from India, it would be the cheapest wheat because there would be very little transportation and logistical cost. But because they don't want that, they are in talks with Russia and other far off nations from where when they import wheat, they would have to pay a much higher transportation charge. So just imagine if the situation would have been slightly more normal between the two sides, it would have been in the interest of both the nations. We would have had a good market just at our neighborhood, while Pakistan would have been able to buy this stuff at a much cheaper price. But now we are not being able to see eye to eye on these matters, and that is going against the interests of both the nations. The next article that we have here is actually an interview on a very interesting topic. If you read the headline, the topic is, do we need to compensate those who have been implicated in false cases? Now, the reason why this article has been written is that recently Shah Rukh Khan's son was acquitted of the drug case that was going on against him. Now, we are not going to be focusing on that particular case, but we will be focusing on the issue that is at hand. The simple question is, let's say someone has been arrested by the police on charges of murder or any serious charge. Now, the person is sent to jail while the case starts going on in the judiciary. On an average in India, it takes 6 to 8 years for a case to conclude. Now, for these 6 to 8 years, if the person has committed or the person is accused of a serious crime, the person will spend this time in the prison. Now, what happens if after these 6 to 8 years, the person is let free or the person is acquitted? Should the person not be compensated for everything that the person has had to go through? He or she has lost the most precious years of his or her life. There is such a lot of trauma, physical and mental, that the person might have to go through. And not just the single person. It would be on the family, it would be on the children. Just imagine in a village if a person has been arrested for some crime. the children of that particular person, when they go to school, when they go out in the open to play, what kind of things would they be forced to hear? That is why the suggestion is that the enforcement authorities, if they have made a mistake, knowingly or unknowingly, if they have arrested a person who later on has been acquitted and there was no evidence against that person, the person should be compensated. We see what happened in case of Aryan Khan also. There were so many news stories written about him, about how the superstars and their children have it easy in their life, etc. etc. There was a lot of trauma, loss of prestige that was seen in this particular case. But now that the person has been acquitted, there is no compensation that is given to him. This is what the debate is. Now, what we actually see in India is yes, there is no law for such compensation. But it does happen that in certain cases, the judiciary does ask the government to compensate the person for false charges. And I'll give you an example in just a bit. In this particular article, there are 2 points of view. One point of view is yes, the person does deserve compensation because of all the trauma that the person has been through for so many years. The other point of view is that we have to understand it is not just the agencies who are responsible. See, when the police arrest you, as you know, within 24 hours they have to present you before the magistrate to ask for your custody. Now, if the courts agree only and only then you are sent to jail. So, if the courts had sent you to jail and after that the same court acquits you, then the responsibility should be on the courts as well. They were also involved in sending you to prison prima facie on the basis of the first evidence that they saw. So it is a collective blame of the enforcement agencies as well as the judiciary that is involved here. The article also says that the judiciary must understand that the orders that they give in many times are not really applied on the ground. For example, the Supreme Court has struck down Section 66A of the IT Act under the Shreya Shinghal case. This was a law that was used by the enforcement agencies to arrest a lot of people even when they tweeted something against a politician. Even on those charges, people were arrested. This was struck down by the Supreme Court. But the reality is that even today, a lot of cases are filed by the police under this particular law, even though it has been struck down. Now, who will take the blame in this regard? Should the judiciary not be more concerned and more serious that their orders are not being followed? And should they not make the police accountable for not following their order? This is also a suggestion. In short, it is not just the enforcement agencies, the judiciary also has to step up and make sure that in false cases, when false evidence is given, the authorities are held responsible. The Law Commission also in the past has suggested having this kind of a law. So the Law Commission in its 277th report titled Wrongful Prosecution Legal Remedies had recommended that there should be certain legal provisions for redressal of such cases. The Delhi High Court has also said that if a person is kept in jail, although the person is entitled to bail and even has all the documents, but even then the person is being kept in jail, then the person has to have certain compensation. Although there is no particular formula to calculate this kind of compensation, but we have seen in the past how the courts have actually directed the government to give such compensation. One very famous example of this issue is this case of Nambi Narayanan, the former ISRO scientist on whom a case went on for many years when he was accused of being a spy. He lost his job, he lost all his reputation, he lost his entire career, he's an old man now. And after so many years, now that he has been acquitted, the court has ordered the government to pay him a compensation of 1.3 crore rupees. So there are examples of how the judiciary has asked for such a compensation to be paid. Although it's not a concrete law, but the judiciary has done this. Now let me add one more view in this particular debate. It's not just about the police. Let's also talk about the CAG. Now, when we had the UPA government in power from 2004 to 2014, when Dr. Manmohan Singh was the Prime Minister, you would have remembered that there were a lot of CAG reports that came out saying that there are a lot of scams that are being done at the government level. The CAG report talked about the 2G scam. The CAG report talked about the Adarsh Ghotala. They also talked about the Commonwealth Games scam, etc. So much so that in 2014, when the elections were fought, there was this narrative built in the entire country that the UPA government is a very corrupt government. Why? Because the CAG reports say so. Now let's see what is happening today. Is anyone in jail for these cases? No. There is no big name that is in the jail for these cases. All of them have been acquitted. Now the question is, if the CAG gave such big reports, I still remember in the 2G scam, the CAG said that the exchequer has had a loss of 1,76,000 crore rupees, the largest ever number anyone would have seen in terms of the scams in India. But nothing could be proved. So, if the CAG gives such kind of a report, which cannot be proven in the court eventually, on the basis of which there is a lot of criticism that is done of the government or of the people involved, should the CAG also not be held responsible for these kind of reports? Can the CAG just say, oh, sorry, I could not prove it, or there was not enough evidence to prove it? And if there is not, then how did the CAG come about with this number? A few years back, in fact, there was this big debate about the CAG's accountability, the fact that he or she is not accountable. Similarly, the CAG in question, that is Vinod Rai, actually apologized to the Congress leader Sanjay Nirupam a few months back when he said that sorry, I misspoke in my report. I never talked to Sanjay Nirupam. Earlier in his report, he had put charges on Sanjay Nirupam, but later on he had to apologize. Even in this case, he just apologized for all the loss of reputation that Sanjay Nirupam or other leaders would have had. Only thing that they got in return was an apology and not a compensation. So this policy of compensation is not just restricted to the police authorities, it is also restricted to all other kind of government authorities like CAG. So if we are having a debate on this matter, let's include the CAG also in that. The next article that we have here is about China's efforts to grow its footprint in the Pacific Islands. Now, in short, what has happened is, in the past few years or so, we have seen China putting a lot of emphasis on increasing its outreach to the small Pacific Island nations. There are a total of 14 nations actually, which are together called the Pacific Island countries, that is the PIC. The reason why we are discussing this is that the Chinese foreign minister is actually on a visit to 10 of these nations one by one, starting with Fiji, to ensure that all of these sign a favorable deal with China. Now, this is a dangerous sign for nations which are not on good terms with China, be it Australia, US, or even India, because this is seen as China's outreach to these small island nations and increase its influence in the Indo-Pacific. However, the good part that has happened here is that China wanted to sign a security pact with all these nations collectively. So they wanted all the nations to collectively sign a pact under which they agree that China will be able to provide them security, similar to the pact that China recently signed with the Solomon Islands. However, fortunately for India, US, and Australia, the Pacific Island countries rejected this security pact and they have said that no, we won't sign it. Now, China does have an option to go to these countries individually one by one and see which country agrees and which country does not. But at least as a whole, the group has rejected this security pact. Now, these 14 nations, including Fiji, Kiribati, Marshall Islands, etc., are usually divided into three groups: Micronesia, Melanesia, and Polynesia. Now, you would argue that these are very, very small nations, hardly any population. Why would China want to have good relationship with them? Or why is China putting so much emphasis on them? Now, there are two very, very interesting reasons for that. The first interesting reason is the exclusive economic zones. Now, these are very small island nations. In fact, each of these nations are a group of small islands. Now, because they are small islands, by the law of United Nations Convention on the Law of Sea, they have very, very large exclusive economic zones. So they might have a population of just a few lakh people, but their exclusive economic zones are some of the largest in the world. In fact, small nations such as Kiribati has an exclusive economic zone larger than that of entire India. And this is what China is after. Gaining control of this EEZ would allow China to extract minerals and other kind of resources from these waters, which is what China intends to do. The second reason why China really wants to have good relations with the second reason why China wants to have good relationship with them is that in the UN General Assembly, every nation has one vote each. So even though these 14 nations combined will still be a fraction of population of India or some other nation, they all have 14 votes together. So they are a great vote bank for taking forward your agenda in UN and in other international groups. That is why China has been very eager to have good relationship with them. Added to that, the fact that China wants to counter the expansion of Quad and the expansion of Australia and US in the Pacific Ocean. That is why they want to ensure that they sign a pact such as this with these nations in the Pacific Ocean. Now, the interesting part is that China does not have any old historic ties with these nations. They hardly had any diplomatic relations. It's only in the recent past that China has realized their significance, and that is why China is now trying to forge relationship with them. China is also looking at them to ensure that when they go ahead and try to reunify Taiwan with China, forcefully or by diplomacy, they want that all these small island nations nearby Taiwan should be having a security pact with China, so that China can place their military in these small island nations, so that if they have to go on an offensive against any country, they do have a lot of support. These are some of the objectives that China has in their mind while going ahead with this. So much so that recently a few documents also were leaked from Chinese government side. One of the documents was called China Pacific Islands Countries Common Development Vision, that talks about China's vision for these countries in the next 5 years. Thankfully, China has not been able to get consensus on the security part, but in the long run, this is a dangerous sign for nations such as Australia, USA, and India, because if China can get one country, that is the Solomon Islands, to sign on such a pact, they can do that individually one by one with each country without having the need to have all of them together. This is the area that we are talking about. As you can see, very close to Australia and New Zealand, very close to Taiwan also, and that is why it is of much interest to China. As I said earlier, the good news for India is that the Pacific nations, at least for now, have rejected this security pact with China, but it does not really stop China from trying harder the next time around. This is what China's plan is, to have a security pact in very simple terms, to ensure these nations that whenever you need any security, our Chinese military will be ready to come and help you. And under this, you should also allow Chinese Navy and Chinese infrastructure to be built in your small island nations. The next article that we have here is about India and Israel's defense ministers meeting recently in New Delhi, and also the two sides signing a vision statement to deepen the bilateral relations. Now, 2022 marks the 30th year anniversary of the bilateral relations between India and Israel that were established officially in 1992 only, when PV Narasimha Rao was the Prime Minister. Now, as you know, before 1992, India was very supportive of the stand of Palestine, and they thought that Israel should not be given a diplomatic status, and we will not recognize Israel because we wanted to have much better relationship with the Arab nations in the Middle East. But in 1992, under PV Narasimha Rao's government, we realized the significance of having good relationship with Israel, and since then the two sides have come closer on a lot of issues, including defense, science, government to government framework, technology, etc. The two sides right now are also talking in terms of the free trade agreement, which may be signed in the coming months, thus adding one more of such agreements in India's tally in the past few years. Now, when you look at India-Israel relations, usually we talk about these relations in terms of defense only, and that is actually true. So much so that just in a few years, India has become the largest buyer of military equipment from Israel. The good part is that the military equipment coming in from Israel is very high quality, and they are the best in the world. That is why Israel has become India's second largest defense supplier just after Russia. The main weapons that we have bought from Israel include the airborne warning and control system. There are a lot of drones that we are working on with Israel. We have also taken the Barak anti-missile defense system, etc. The other acquisitions from Israel also include the Python and the Derby air-to-air missiles, the Crystal Maze and the Spice 2000 bombs as well. We also saw how significant they can be when we had this air skirmish with Pakistan just a couple of years back. Now, interestingly, apart from the defense trade, we also have trade with Israel on other aspects as well. Interestingly, the trade in diamonds constitutes about half of the bilateral trade, And that is why Israel is such an important country for India. Not just the fact that they support India on a lot of issues in the UN, be it Kashmir, be it other human rights related issues, but also because the trade between the two sides has been very, very favorable for India. Right now, the bilateral merchandise trade between the two sides is close to $4.14 billion, excluding defense. So, defense is another part of the trade that we are not including here. You all must be well aware of the advancements that Israel has made in the field of science and technology, and India has also had the pleasure of sharing a lot of that. In fact, India has sent a lot of people over to Israel, the experts, to learn about the water desalination system, to learn about the waste disposal and the waste segregation technology, etc., which Israel has mastered in the past few years. In fact, India and Israel had also signed the I4F, that is, India Israel Industrial Research and Development and Technological Innovation Fund. It is a cooperation between the two sides to support joint industrial R&D projects between the countries of the two sides. So as you can see, in just a few decades, Israel-India relationship have improved considerably for the benefits of the two sides, India and Israel both, especially in terms of the technology support that we are getting from Israel and the top of the line weapons that we can get from Israel. These are the important articles from the Hindu newspaper today. Now a couple of practice questions. Number one, rather than focusing on the Kashmir issue, India-Pakistan relations can benefit considerably by focusing on the low-hanging fruit such as the Sir Creek dispute, Siachen and resumption of bilateral trade. Do you agree? Discuss. Second, within a short span of time, Israel has emerged as one of India's most significant partners in many areas. Comment. Both these questions have to be answered within 250 words each. You can answer these questions on the BYJU'S portal, the link for which is given in the description of the video. If you go to that portal, you can see answers written by the other aspirants also. You can check them out, leave your feedback, and the others will do the same for you so that you can learn from each other's efforts and improve in the future. Thank you so much for watching the video. Have a good day ahead.